Hey, and the show's live. All right, let's get this thing rolling. Welcome to the Iron Sysadmin podcast, your source for IT news, commentary, and a healthy dose of paranoia. Hey folks, it's Nate, and I'm all alone tonight. All my co-hosts have bailed. They're either sleeping, out with their families, or dealing with screaming children. So, you guys get me tonight. Hopefully this isn't a train wreck of a show. Luckily, the thing we were planning on talking about was AWS reInvent, which is a conference that I went to, and none of the co-hosts were there. So, yeah, basically it was going to be mostly about me talking anyway. So hopefully I don't bore you guys with this. Won't be as much banter tonight, but I'll try to get the information out there as best I can, and then you guys can let me know if it was horrible or not. Maybe we'll never do this again. So we're going to skip the news tonight, or I'm going to skip the news tonight, mainly because there's no co-hosts, and also because this is an off week, and I was trying to keep the show short. So no news for tonight, even though I'm sure there was news to cover. Like I said, we're going to skip it for tonight. We will be back next week, and next week we're going to have Ed Scotus on. You may know Ed Scotus from the Holiday Hack Challenge and Counter Hack? Not Counter Hack. Well, whatever. He's a SANS instructor, and yeah, he's one of the brains, or maybe the main brain, behind the Holiday Hack Challenge, which is something I enjoy trying my skills at every year around Christmas time. The contest opens, I think it's early next week, like Monday, December 10th. And we're going to have him on Wednesday, December 12th. So hopefully I can get co-hosts around for that. If not, whatever. I'm going to do it myself because Ed Scotus is a cool guy. I've met him a couple times. Haven't really had a good chance to chat with him much. But yeah, he does some really cool stuff. And Holiday Hack is something I really appreciate. I love that he gives that out to the community. So we were hoping to get him on the show to chat about Holiday Hack. It'll be 2 days after it opens, so he may have some cool hints or clues, maybe. I don't know. Maybe he'll drop that. Maybe he won't. I know before Holiday Hack opens, he's usually pretty tight-lipped about the content that you'll find inside. So we may luck out. That's just how scheduling fell. He's going to be here 2 days after it opens. If you're interested in joining Holiday Hack, he's running it. He's calling it KringleCon this year, which is supposedly this conference that Santa Claus is running after the events of the past couple holiday hacks. He's running his own security conference, I guess, to improve the security of the North Pole. So it's a pretty cool little premise there. You can, if you sign up, you can log into this KringleCon world already, and you're basically stuck in LineCon outside of the gates of the North Pole. So it's kind of cool. Yeah, it'll be fun, I think. I'm looking forward to that interview next week. So as long as schedules line up and nothing happens, we should expect to have a nice interview with Ed next week. So yeah, something cool to look forward to. So I've been trying to cover our reviews more, and as I said, we don't usually get a whole lot of reviews. It turns out that between the last show and this one, we got 2 new reviews on iTunes. So I'm going to go over those quick. The first one, these are both 5-star reviews, which is cool. We very much appreciate that. This is from a user named CoolGuy10671067. He just says its title of it is Worth the Time. He just says, great podcast with a wide variety of IT topics. Thanks, guys. Well, we appreciate it. We try to cover lots of topics, and we try not to be too pigeonholed into any one specific thing, even though our expertise just does generally lie in a certain place. We try to cover things outside of that particular venue, and it helps us learn stuff, so that's pretty cool. And the other one is from a user named Jerry Kin, K-I-N-H. Sorry if I've mispronounced that. He says, great show. And it says, I'm a network systems admin in the mining industry. I really like the topics you cover and your insight on the IT world. So again, thank you, Jerry. We appreciate the review. So you guys can go leave us a review on iTunes if you want to. If you don't, that's fine, whatever. But this is a great way for us to get feedback so we know what you guys like and what you don't. I don't care if you help us climb the charts on iTunes or Apple Podcasts, although that's a cool added bonus. What I really want is to know what you guys think of the show. So we've had some feedback. Obviously, this is public feedback. Public feedback, it helps other people figure out what the show's all about, and that's cool. So yeah, without the news, I'm just gonna head right on into the main topic here, and that is AWS reInvent. So I got back from AWS reInvent this past Friday. That is Friday of the end of last week. AWS reInvent was all last week. Flew out there Sunday, yeah, Sunday afternoon during the day. Flew out there with my boss and one of my coworkers. And basically, this is all because my employer is looking into leveraging AWS a little more heavily. We've, I don't want to say opposed, but we have not leveraged the cloud thus far for anything intentional. We have a couple services that we pay for instead of running ourselves, and obviously they're probably running on the cloud, but we didn't do that intentionally. That was more or less we bought a software as a service solution instead of an on-prem solution. Um, the way it looks, the industry is more and more going to be pushing us toward a cloud model. So we're trying to get ahead of that train before it hits us blindsided. So we're trying to learn as much as we can about AWS and how to utilize it and how it best fits in with what we do. So we figured AWS reInvent was a great place to sort of just jump right in and figure out more about what this AWS thing is all about. Now, I'm not an AWS noob. I've been poking at AWS for quite a while. I set up an account probably 6-7 years ago just to see what the heck it was, how to use it, what to do with it. I've mainly focused on EC2 and S3 because they're they're the things that make the most sense to me, right? I'm not a developer. I'm a sysadmin. So basically, a lot of what AWS is built for is to enable developers to get their applications up and running quickly. And there's really not a whole lot of room for sysadmins, from what I can tell. But like I said, EC2, S3, they're both sort of my bread and butter, storage and compute. So they were where I've gravitated thus far. They are not, however, the most efficient ways to use AWS, and maybe I'll talk about that a little more as I go through my review of reInvent. So first of all, reInvent is held out in Vegas, much like many IT conferences. Vegas is just I'm just going to talk a little bit about Vegas in general. This is the first time I've been to Vegas. In fact, this is the first time in my adult life that I've even flown anywhere. So this is all kind of a big deal for me. Last time I flew, I have family in Germany, right? So when I was like 2 or 3 years old, my parents took me on a trip, and I barely remember it. I haven't flown since then. So, all those years from then till now, I'll just say that there are several decades between then and now. So things have changed a lot. There was no TSA last time I flew, and even if there was, not that I would remember it. All I remember is being on the plane and seeing clouds out the window. So anyway, so flying to Vegas it's really kind of the only option for me. I live on the East Coast, Pennsylvania, if any of you don't know that already. I couldn't exactly drive to Vegas, at least not in any way that was effective, or either for time management purposes or cost purposes. Flying out just made the most sense. I suppose I could have taken a train, but to be honest, I just didn't look into that deeply because everyone I was going with was flying, and it just made sense. So anyway, flew to Vegas. Flying was an interesting event for me. Just like I said, because I hadn't done it. I've heard all kinds of stories about how horrible the TSA is and whatever. And to be honest, the whole thing was pleasant enough. Had to take off my shoes at the airport and take off my belt and put my laptop in a box and let them scan it and all this stuff, which is all very odd. But whatever. It's all for security, right? We got to stop the terrorists. At any rate, the flight out was pretty uneventful, which is exactly how you'd like a flight to be. The it's well, like I said, an interesting new life event for me. I can't say that I'm opposed to flying. I don't know that I'll be looking forward to flying again, but it's not as low on the list of options for me as it used to be. I'll put it that way. I know a lot of people fly like as a daily course of business. I'm just not that guy. I'd rather drive somewhere. So anyway, moving along. This is also the first time I'd ever been in Vegas. I'm a rather conservative guy. Vegas is really out of my comfort zone. I don't like cities much. Um, Vegas isn't. I just don't know how to describe it. It's not a city like New York. Um, it's also not a city like Boston, which are the other two large cities that I've been in my life that I would consider large. It's just really a thing in its own. The best way I can describe it is actually the way my boss had jokingly described it on our way back, that it's Disneyland for adults, and that's really a great description. If you want to just be an adult and go be a kid again in adult ways, you should go to Vegas. There's just like there's gambling, there's things to buy, there's debauchery everywhere, and if you're into that stuff, you could waste a lot of money and you could have a whole lot of fun in Vegas. Um, I don't recommend it if you're opposed to things like gambling or like naked women, because not that they're. I mean, gambling is everywhere; it's in your face. Whatever, you can avoid it easily enough by simply walking past it. But I know a lot of people are very offended by nudity, and it's not that there's actually nudity on display everywhere, but it's very, very heavily suggested. I even saw like a box truck with an advertisement on the side of it for call girls. You just literally, you could like be in your hotel room and call them up, and they will come find you and do things with you. Um, so for anyone who doesn't like that side of life, you may want to avoid Vegas because it is literally everywhere. It's almost impossible to avoid. Personally, I don't participate in that kind of thing, but I also understand that people do, and I understand that it's a business, and I understand that I can simply ignore it, and that's what I did. So, at any rate, that's not why I was there, but it's just my impressions of Vegas. It's a very well, it's a weird place. That's really the best way I can describe it. To everyone that I've talked to that has not been to Vegas, that I've talked to since I got back, that's the best way I've been able to describe it. It's just an odd place. It is not like any place I have ever been, and that's Vegas. Oh, another thing, um, lights, noise, and music and advertisements just everywhere you can look. Um, the best way I can say it is that Times Square has nothing on uh on Vegas. Vegas just has just everywhere. There's screens, there's ads, there's everything. It's just everything everywhere. Um you go down the strip in Vegas and there are literally like curved displays on the side of every building you pass, and they're all advertised. I mean, they're actually surprisingly high definition for what they are, which is kind of weird. I didn't know you could get a display that large with that level of definition. But anyway, I don't want to go too deeply into just like what Vegas is and whatnot. But if you've never been to reInvent and you're using this as a way to sort of prepare for it, I figured that was worth mentioning. Um, there are there's a series of videos that you can watch that are published by Amazon that are called How to Reinvent, and they were actually really helpful. They helped me prepare for what exactly Vegas is and how the conference is set up and just sort of what to expect. One of the things that they emphasized in those preparation videos is that there is just a ton of walking. And they weren't wrong. So I'll give you an idea of the scale of AWS reInvent. Um, the number I kept hearing was that there's 50,000 attendees. I don't know if that includes staff, but there was a ton of staff too. So that may or may not include the staff. It's spread out across, I think it was 7 different hotel casino resorts. Let's see, it was the Bellagio, the Venetian, the MGM Grand, the Aria, the Encore, and the Mirage, and I think that was all of them. Is that all of them? Was that 7? I think that's all of them. And they had shuttles that went in between them, so you didn't necessarily have to walk around the streets of Vegas, which I was grateful for because, again, like I said, don't like cities. There was I stayed at the MGM Grand, and the Aria is close enough that it's walkable, and I did walk that once, and it was kind of a cool walk. Um, but every subsequent journey I made to the various venues, I used the shuttle instead. So, um, yeah, it really has a feel that it's hard to describe. It's almost like it's 7 different separate conferences, all with the same theme and the same organization. You go to one venue, and basically everything you need to host a conference is there. There's there's a room for meals. There's hotel rooms to stay in. There's conference talk tracks. There's like a hangout lounge area, and there's just people everywhere, right? So you could walk into any one of these venues, and it would just feel like a little conference or a smaller conference. Um, but it was obviously, all coordinated together. So yeah, it was definitely an interesting feel. The biggest conference I've ever been to, I'd have to say. The closest I came before that would be Red Hat Summit several years ago, and I want to say they're on the magnitude of like 10 to 20,000 people. I don't have an exact number there. There were a lot of people, but it was all within one conference center. But it was an actual big conference center, not a hotel and casino thing. So, talking a little bit about the hotel and casino resorts, they're laid out in such a way, and this is why there's so much walking, even within the venue, right? So, like I said, I was staying in the MGM Grand. In the MGM Grand, walking from my hotel room to breakfast, probably like a quarter mile, which is a lot when you consider that I didn't even go outside, right? So, the way the MGM Grand is laid out is so you come in like the front door, like you would any hotel, come into like a lobby area. You check in, whatever. It feels just like any other hotel. As soon as you leave the check-in area, you can tell you're in Vegas because right there's the casino, and it is just aisles and rows of slot machines and other automated gambling machines. There's blackjack tables, and there's craps tables, and just like whatever you could imagine to go gamble. Right? Poker tournaments, all these things. Uh, you get through the casino, and then there's the banks of elevators where you can go up to your rooms. And there were, I mean, a lot of rooms. I don't know what the number is, but it's a pretty big hotel. I'll put it that way. And it wasn't even the biggest hotel in the conference, right? I think the Venetian was probably the biggest. And you could tell simply by walking in there they had the most space and they had the most things going on. So anyway, from the bank of elevators, if you were to try to get to the conference center, you have to go back through the casino, out the other side of it, right? And then down through what essentially comes down to a small shopping mall. There were lots of stores, lots of places to eat. There was even like a CSI experience shop where it looked like you could just kind of go in and get pictures that made it look like you were on a crime scene from the show CSI Las Vegas. There was a Morimoto's sushi shop. If you're not familiar with Morimoto, he's one of those Iron Chefs from the Iron Chef TV show, which ironically is what I themed the name of this podcast after. Iron Sysadmin, Iron Chef. Aha, I get it. Go listen to episode 1, and I explain that. So anyway, we ate there one night, which is first time I had sushi. A lot of firsts for me in Vegas. So anyway, you walk through there, and then you're at the conference center. And the conference center itself, there was like a hallway that felt like it was 2 miles long. I had to go down. And then there was like a place for breakfast. And then there were a couple tracks for talks. And really what they held in the MGM Grand were these boot camps, which I'm going to talk about in a little bit, what a boot camp is and what you got out of those. I did attend one boot camp. They cost extra on top of the conference, and I'll explain why in a minute. So the conference had things set up for basically you had talk tracks during the day, sessions to attend, or these boot camps, or a couple other things. And then they had in the evenings, they almost always had something going on, whether it was an event from the conference or whether it was a like a vendor event. Vendors, every night I was there, I had a chance to go out to some sort of a party or a dinner or hors d'oeuvres and drinks or whatever from some group or vendor or another. And that's pretty much how I ate the whole conference. I don't think so. Coming back to do my expense report, right? Um, every time I ate, I was with my boss, so he pretty much paid. And I think even he only paid for like 4 meals the whole week we were there because the conference gave you breakfast and lunch and dinner. We almost always went out to one of these get togethers and we just basically ate, hors d'oeuvres and drank, and then that was enough, right? Um, so the other thing about, or in reference to scale, is the amount of staff that must go into running this show. Um, there were people, AWS reInvent anyway, people everywhere. I don't know that they were actually Amazon employees. I think I get the feeling that they were like locals that were hired in for the weekend because a lot of them had a lot of knowledge of Vegas. So it could just be that they studied Vegas well enough that they could be useful, but they're basically like guides. Um, there were these people that would stand around. They had blue shirts on that said "Ask Me" on the front, and they wore like this little backpack that had no lie, a flag on the back that reminded me very much of like you've seen ancient Japanese warfare where they're like running into battle and they have these big paper flags on their back to show you like what army they're with or whatever. That's very much what it looked like, except they said AWS reInvent on the flag. But anyway, these people were everywhere, and you couldn't go like 50 yards without running into another one. So if you were trying to get somewhere, either in Vegas on the streets, because they were out on the streets, or within the various venues, because like I said, they were so vast. All you'd have to do is find one of these people and say, "Hey, I'm trying to get here." And then they would give you some directions and they would rattle them off. And sometimes these were several step directions, right? Whatever. So you can imagine like you're trying to file these away and go, okay, I need to go to this place and then make a right and then that place and make a left and pass the elevator bank and, whatever. As soon as you got out of sight of the person you asked, you'd find another person with a flag. And you could ask them, like, "Oh, yeah, that one sent me this way. Where do I go now?" And you could pretty much just go from anywhere you are to anywhere you want to go, hopping from person to person to person. That's how close together they were. And they were really helpful and really friendly, right? So, I mean, you'd think people that are just hired to stand around and tell you directions all day, they might get bored or they might get tired of it or they might get tired of answering the same question all day. Well, these people were genuinely friendly. I had one girl, and this is like a weird story, but I walked into, I think it was the Bellagio, and this is the first time I'd been in the Bellagio, and I just didn't know where to go. And you could sort of generally feel your way around. When you got into any of these venues, you could generally just look at the signage and look for anything that said conference center and start going that direction, because you could almost bet that that's where you would find the conference, right? The conference center. So anything that sounded like conference center, start going that way, and you'd eventually find people with flags. Well, I ran into this girl with a flag. Didn't physically run into her. I got to the conference center area, and she was standing there, and I just needed to know where the meals were, I think, because I wanted to get lunch and then attend a session. She just like stood there and chatted with me for like 15 minutes. Like, "Oh, where are you from?" "Oh, yeah, I'm from Georgia." Not me. She's from Georgia. She's telling me about like cartoons she watched as a kid. And I'm like, this is strange. This is just a really strange conversation I'm having with this girl. She was younger than me. She might have been in her 20s. So significantly, I don't want to say significantly, I don't feel that old, but she's younger enough that a lot of the stuff, the conversation that we had, we couldn't really relate because, she's just from a different time almost. But anyway, she asked me if I recycle. I looked at her for a second and I'm thinking in my head, like, no one's asked me that since the 90s. When it was such a big deal, right? All of a sudden we need to recycle because it's a thing and we're destroying the planet. I'm like, well, yeah, I recycle. She actually questioned me because I hesitated a minute. I'm like, well, I was taken aback by someone asking me if I recycle. "Oh, yeah, well, we recycle here and here's the recycle." But I'm like, thank you. At that point, I'm like, I want to get away from this girl. And I went and got my lunch. But yeah, really strange interaction with one of these, these guides. Yeah, it's set up friendly though. Don't get me wrong. No negative opinion here. She just real talkative. Maybe she was just bored. I don't know. Um, so moving away from scale and into the sort of content that I experienced at reInvent. Now, I didn't go to see every type of talk, but as I understand it, the types of talks that you could attend were chalk talks, which were sort of like a cross between a breakout session and like a architecture design session. So you'd walk in. I didn't go to one of these, but my boss did. He said you go in and there's a speaker of some sort who's basically an expert on a certain topic, and he's got a whiteboard and he'll talk to you about the thing that he's there to talk about. And then if you have questions, you can literally like get up with him and you can chat with him, and they'll draw stuff out on the whiteboard, and that's why they call it a chalk talk. Think like chalkboard. I guess dry erase talk didn't sound nearly as interesting, so they call it a chalk talk. So those chalk talks, breakout sessions are what you'd expect them to be. They're basically your standard talk, your standard session where, a group of people come in and listen to someone talk about, a project they did, or a service or whatever. Um, of course, keynotes. There were several keynotes. I only saw one of them, which was the one from, I keep forgetting the guy's name. He's like the CTO of AWS. Vogel. Sorry, guys, I'm bad with names. I should have wrote this down. You think I would know this. And then Jassy, Andy, I think his name is Andy Jassy. He's like the head honcho of AWS. He had another keynote. And apparently during both keynotes, they just like dropped a whole bunch of new services, new offerings that were coming to AWS. And I'll talk a little bit about those at the end of my little rant here, not rant, but my little session about AWS, about what sort of new offerings they came up with. There was a ton. I'm not going to list them all. I do have a link in the show notes here to where you can go read up about all the new offerings that they announced at AWS reInvent. So you can go check that out. The keynotes and then deep dives, which were basically like breakout sessions, except they went a little more in depth on whatever they were talking about. Like I attended a deep dive on the AWS storage gateway because it's something that we're interested in, and I got a pretty good understanding of how the thing operates and what their new physical appliance does, which was not a thing they offered before. How you buy it, how you hook the thing up, how you might architect it. Things like that. So that's what deep dives came down to. And then there were boot camps, and the boot camps were basically, I think, and I could be wrong, but I think they were all based on preparing you for certification. So I don't know how long they've been doing it, but Amazon offers, or AWS offers, certification exams now, so you can become certified in AWS's services. I attended a boot camp. Let's see, what was it called? AWS Certification Exam Readiness, SysOps Administrator Associate. Now, I think that is the name of a certification that you can get. I haven't dug too deeply into certification on AWS just yet. This was recommended. My boss said, hey, you might want to attend this because it sounds relevant. So I did. And it's basically, as the title suggests, an exam readiness course. And it's not even like a soup to nuts exam readiness course. Like you couldn't go take this and then go take the exam. It's not training. It's more or less, we're going to give you an idea of what to expect on the exam. And we're going to talk a little bit about how you might try to study for the exam and how you might prepare for the exam. It was about a half-a-day course. And I got to say, I don't feel impressed by the way Amazon is certifying people. Now, again, limited exposure here. I haven't taken any of the exams. All I've been through is this boot camp. It felt. I'm going to share a little story. In the 90s, when I was getting out of high school and through business school and starting to think about certifications, there was this running joke that exams like the what was it? What was Novell's certification? The CNE, I think it was called. Exams like the MCSE, which was relatively new at the time, they were like a joke. You could buy a book, you could study it and memorize it, and you could go get certified, and without even touching a dang computer, right? That is what the exam readiness course made me feel that this exam would be all about. I could go buy a book, I could read the book, I could learn all the various services, what they do, and how to implement them, and then I could go take the certification. Now, I get it. Certifications are all about demonstrating product knowledge. The thing that I compare all certification exams to is Red Hat certifications, because I'm a Red Hat guy. I've got 3 Red Hat certifications. Um, their exams are practical, 100% practical. There's no multiple choice. There's no written answer. You literally walk into a classroom uh, on exam day. This doesn't include the coursework, because the coursework is all, of course, written. There's studying and whatnot, but it's, again, that's all practical too. But the exam is literally, you walk in, you sit at a computer, and you're given tasks to perform, and you do them, and then there's automated scripts that grade you based on how well you did. You know, there's things like set up a web server, make IP tables block this network of bad people, put this content on the web server, make SE Linux allow the web server to work properly, make an FTP server that does this thing. And you have to do all these things. And then the scripts simply check, like, can I FTP to the thing? Is the file there? Yes, it is. Okay. You get a passing grade for that thing. Can I hit the web server? Okay, it is. Good. I feel like AWS's certifications could easily do that. They could say, design me a thing on AWS that does this, this, and that, and do it as best you can. And then there's an automation thing. I mean, what? AWS is all about APIs anyway, right? They could check the freaking API, see what you've provisioned, try it out, make sure the service does what it's supposed to do, and then you'd have an actual practical test that shows that not only did you read a book and learn what the services do and when you should use them, but you actually know how to use them. Doesn't that sound like a good way to certify people in AWS? Because it sure works for Red Hat. Anyway, I want to get off my exam or my certification rant before I say something that's going to get me in trouble or something. But my point is, I feel like the exams are all written, and the few people that I've talked to who have been through a few of them said that, yes, they are in fact all written. I don't know if that changes the further up the exam ladder you get, but that sort of disappoints me. And I guess that's all I'm going to say about that. So, on to announcements for new services that they gave us during AWS reInvent. Now, like I said, this is not a full list. These are just things that sounded interesting to me that I thought would be fun to talk about on the show. So, the first thing I got listed, and like I said, it's in the show notes, is the URL to where Amazon themselves are telling you what the new things that they have released are. So check that out. It's in the links. It's just aws.amazon.com/new/reinvent. So some things of note. Blockchain. You can run a blockchain, a managed blockchain on AWS now. This is apparently a new thing. Blockchains everywhere, right, guys? So you got to have software as a service blockchain, because why the hell not? So yeah, blockchain. Go blockchain all the things on AWS. Firecracker, which is, I think this is an interesting name for what I understand to be a micro VM infrastructure for running Lambda. So if you're not familiar with Lambda, which I wasn't very familiar with Lambda when I came into AWS reInvent, I knew what it was, and I knew what people were using it for vaguely, but I didn't really understand the draw to it. I understand a little better now, but Lambda is basically, you write code. It's this whole serverless movement that people are talking about. You write code, you put it in Lambda. You can like make that code run event driven, so that basically you have a very small piece of code. You might call it a microservice. Containers, hello, folks. It's a very small piece of code that will sit there in Lambda, and when you call it, it does its thing, it returns its value, or it interacts with some other thing, or it calls an API, or it writes to a message bus, or whatever. It just does its thing, and that's all it's for. And then it moves on. Well, apparently Firecracker is what they have now developed to further isolate the Lambda functions and maybe other things, containers or something, so that they are run in a more secure way on AWS. It sounds like your Lambda functions are basically running on what would equate to an EC2 instance. And what Firecracker does is it takes that EC2 instance and turns it into this tiny little thing that is very purpose built to just do the thing you've asked it to do. And as we all know, the smaller the thing is, the more purpose built it is, the less services it runs, the smaller the attack footprint, and the better isolation you should have. So it sounds kind of cool. I don't know if there's other uses for Firecracker, but from what I understand, that's what they are using it for at the moment, and that's what the announcement was all about. AWS Outposts. Now, try to wrap your head around this. You spend all sorts of time and money taking all the things in your data center, putting them in the cloud. Okay, that's what the cloud's all about, right? Getting it the hell out of your data center. AWS Outposts, get this, is a VMware rack they will roll in to run AWS in your data center. Think about that for a second. Doesn't this defeat the purpose? I don't know. I'm sure there's a very valid use case for this, and I'm really just sort of making fun of it because I think it's really ironic that you'd want to put AWS in your data center. There are other ways to run a private cloud, folks, and I don't think that's what this is. This is really an extension of AWS that runs your stuff, at least the way I understand it. But it's in your data center, and I assume you have to power and cool it, and it's your responsibility to keep the thing running. So doesn't that sort of defeat some of the purpose of going to the cloud in the first place? Maybe if you need better throughput to certain workloads, or maybe if there's sensitive data, like, I don't know, maybe these are use cases for an AWS Outpost. I'm sure they had a good reason for designing these things, and I'm just not seeing it, but it really sounds ironic. Okay, on to the next thing, Lambda layers, which from what I can understand is something like Docker layers. So when you build a Docker container, it's a layered file system, right? So you tell your Docker container, I want you to base yourself on, we'll just say for the sake of simplicity, Ubuntu. And then I want you to install Apache and PHP and MySQL, or I guess not. I guess you wouldn't do that in a container. I want you to install Apache and PHP because I'm going to run a PHP application in this container. And then on top of that, I want you to add in this web application as a file, within the file system of the container. And then on top of that, I want you to, I don't know, add in this user or something, or write this configuration file out to the Apache config file, Apache config structure, right? These are all steps in your Docker file. Each step makes a new layer. So the first layer is I lay down Ubuntu, which is just an image I've pulled from Docker Hub. The second layer is, what did I say, Apache, is I do the apt-get install on Apache and PHP, and that becomes a layer. It's like a task. It writes to the file system in a layer, right? And the point of this is, at any point, you can take the layers you've built and build a different container off of it, right? It sounds like Lambda layers is the same sort of technology where you could write like a very bare bones Lambda function and then layer more functionality on top of that, and then more on top of that, and more on top of that. So that you can essentially reuse the lower layers of the code. Like in my Docker example, you could reuse the Ubuntu layer for lots of different things because all you've got there is Ubuntu. You could reuse the Apache and PHP layer for a bunch of different things because it's a pretty generic thing. Once you get to the point where you've written your application to the layer, now it becomes a little more purpose-built. But the further up the stack you go with the layers, the more generalized it gets and the more reusable it gets. I think that's what Lambda layers are supposed to be all about. The next thing also related to Lambda is you can now apparently put an application load balancer in front of a Lambda function, which I guess was not available before, and now it is. I don't fully get the various load balancer differences. I think, it depends on what layer of the OSI model, I suppose, the load balancing is occurring at. In this case, application load balancer happens at the application layer, right? So that is now a new thing you can put in front of Lambda, which I guess makes sense if you know what an application load balancer does, and it would help you in Lambda. I guess it's something people asked for, so there it is. AWS Ground Station. Now this this is insane. Get ready for this, guys. You can now rent space on satellites from AWS. Satellites as a service. And I mean like real satellites, the ones that orbit the Earth and move data around. So if you are in a position where you need to move data through space, then you can now do it through AWS. I don't know what that costs. I think it's probably going to be expensive, but it's now an option. Man, when I heard this, I didn't hear it during the keynote. I heard, in fact, I think it was Dustin, one of the co-hosts, actually sent me a link, and I'm like, is this from The Onion? Because it sounded insane. But no, it is, in fact, it's on that link I mentioned before. AWS Ground Station. You can actually get space on satellites, or I guess move data through satellites through AWS now, which is just like freaking insane. And the last thing I want to mention is Glacier Deep Archive, which, if you're not familiar with Glacier, it's basically, so with S3 buckets, and I guess with other things, you can tier your storage in such a way that when it ages, it can be moved to lower access storage, thus cheaper storage. So currently, it's like S3 is basically, that's your top of the line S3, right? Then there's infrequent access, which basically says we're going to put your data on slightly less resilient disks, slightly slower disks, and it'll be a little slower to access. It won't be quite as guaranteed, I think, is the deal with infrequent access, and it'll cost you a little less. Which, by the way, S3 has like 11 nines reliability. Wrap your head around that. 11 nines reliability. That is so close to 100% reliability that it's insane. Anyway, so infrequent access, and then you can move. There's like various tiers. Glacier was the absolute lowest cost tier for a very long time, and that's a couple years now. And basically what that says is this is an archive. This is not something you're supposed to be accessing frequently. In fact, it's going to cost you extra to access it if you try to get to it, because you put things in Glacier when you want to keep them for like compliance reasons or for like deep archive backup reasons or whatever, and you don't need to access them often. Say you've been given, our use case is like legal holds. Sometimes we'll be asked to preserve data like file services data and email data when there's a lawsuit surrounding a person, right? So we'll collect that data, and currently it goes to like external drives. So what we're thinking is we're going to put this stuff into S3, protect that S3 bucket. Of course, we got to work through all this. We haven't yet. And then we'll put a retention policy, not a retention policy, but an archiving policy around it, so that after like a month, it's going to go off to Glacier. So it costs us next to nothing not next to nothing, but it costs us much less to store. And there's a good chance we're never going to have to pull it out of there anyway, because that's usually what happens with these things. Well, Glacier Deep Archive is now a fraction of the cost of Glacier. So I don't know if the cost to restore that data has gone up as well. I haven't looked that deeply into this, but it's basically another tier of Glacier. Previously, Glacier was a single tier. It's Glacier. Now there's Glacier and Glacier Deep Archive, which basically says it's even cheaper to store and it's even further away from, ready access. And the other thing that I accidentally skipped over here was, so there's a service called EFS, Elastic File System, I think is what it's called, which is basically like NFS running on AWS, except it's Elastic, right? So you can provision an EFS file system, and you can mount it on a Linux box just like you would an NFS share, and you can write data to it, and it goes right out to the cloud. Well, there's now EFS infrequent access, which was a thing that EFS was lacking. So this is very similar to what I just described with S3, except now with EFS, you can put data into EFS, and if it sits there long enough, it'll go into infrequent access, saving you a little bit of money. So that's a cool feature to add on top of EFS. All right, so the last thing I wanted to chat about, second to last thing, was what sessions I saw, and give you a little bit of a rundown of what I saw and what I thought about it. And I've also got links. All these things were recorded and they're available on YouTube and I think Twitch now, but I've got the YouTube links because they were easy to find. So the first thing was the AWS certification exam readiness that I mentioned earlier. I've already talked about that, so I'm not going to go too deeply into that, except that it was the thing I saw the first day. I believe also on Monday, maybe this was on Tuesday, I don't remember now. I saw a talk named or a session named Get Sassy with Red Hat OpenShift on AWS. And this was kind of cool because they talked about a Red Hat OpenShift Quick Start, which you can run on AWS. So a quick start is basically we've taken a lot of the work out of how you would architect this thing, and it's now automated, right? So you answer some questions and it builds you a thing. So in this case, it would build you Red Hat OpenShift. And the reason I'm interested in this is because I've been interested in OpenShift in OpenShift for quite a while, and I got to be honest, it's not an easy thing to set up. If I had an official sanction asking me to build OpenShift, I could most certainly sit down and study it and figure out all the right answers to all the questions, and I could build this thing from scratch. No doubt in my mind, I could do this. The problem is we don't currently have, a mandate where I work to get OpenShift stood up. I think it would be a good idea. I think that it would benefit our web team. I think it would benefit other things, other groups, but I can't get buy-in. And I think the best way to get buy-in would be to have it up and running so people could actually try it out and see if it does what they want it to do. The problem is I can't get time to sit down and figure out how to build it if nobody's going to buy into it, right? So this is interesting to me simply because now that we have an AWS account, maybe I could spin up OpenShift on AWS relatively quickly and get a proof of concept up and running, and then people can actually poke at it and see how this works. So I'm very interested in that, and it's something that I'm going to try to see if I can get my hands on in the next couple of months and just see if I can get OpenShift set up on AWS and poke at it some. The next thing was a deep dive on Amazon's Elastic File System. I already talked a little bit about EFS. This was a pretty interesting talk, basically, because I wanted to learn a little bit more about what the heck EFS was and what it did. They talked about the infrequent access a little bit, which was the first I'd heard of it, because like I said, I missed the keynote where they talked about it. Sorry, I had to drink some beer. EFS is neat. I can see a use case for it. There's certain needs that S3 does not fill, and EFS fills those in nicely if you're on a Linux box. I want to say that one of the announcements was a way to access EFS from Windows, but don't quote me on that. Go look at the release notes if you want to find out for sure. So yeah, EFS was another talk I saw. I was very interested in containers and how to run them on AWS. So the next one I saw was building a PaaS with Amazon EKS. For the large-scale, highly regulated enterprise. I want to say I only got to see half of this talk because there was somewhere I had to be. But basically, I wanted to get a little more information about what EKS was, how it worked, how you interacted with it, and whatnot. And what I don't necessarily love about EKS, so EKS it's like Elastic Kubernetes Service or something. It's basically Kubernetes running on AWS. The cool thing about it is that it's all managed for you. You basically say, build me an EKS, and it stands up a Kubernetes cluster for you. You probably have to answer some questions, by VPCs or whatever, but it makes it work for you. And you end up with Kubernetes at the other end. The problem is I don't think you get any visibility or any configuration access to the back end of Kubernetes. What you basically get is it stands up a Kubernetes cluster for you and gives you access to the Kubernetes API. So you can do like kubectls and whatnot to run new containers and new workloads and whatever, which is cool if you don't care about what's behind it. If you want to tweak anything, I feel like that's probably a thing you're not going to be able to do here. Now, again, I haven't run EKS. I may try it because it's supposed to be really easy to stand up. But I may give it a poke, and see see what level of control you can have over Kubernetes in an EKS world. But the talk gave me the general feeling that you couldn't manage anything beyond what you can do with kubectl, which might be fine. if you're just looking for a place to run containers, that might be great. So yeah, again, YouTube link in the show notes. The next one I saw was build a hybrid cloud storage architectures with the storage gateway. This is the one I was talking about. That was a deep dive that I thought was pretty interesting. I learned a bit about how the storage gateway works, what the physical appliance was, which it sounds like the physical appliance, he slipped a couple times in the way he referred to it. And I don't know if it was an accident and he was wrong, or if he was giving us a hint as to how this thing operated. So the previous storage gateway appliance was a VMDK that they gave you, and you had to run on VMware infrastructure. I believe they also had a version for Hyper-V. I don't run either of those things. I run Red Hat Virtualization because, like I said, all the Kool-Aid that I drink is red. But I didn't have a way to run the storage gateway. So to me, it was just out, right? Well, now this physical appliance comes along, and I'm like, awesome. Now we can run on a physical appliance. We just buy the thing, put it in our data center, configure it, and off we go. He kept calling it almost as a slip. He kept calling it a hypervisor. So what I expect is that this thing is not just a hardware appliance, but it's actually either a standalone VMware box or a Hyper-V box that is running the storage appliance, which seems like overhead that is unnecessary, but that might be the easiest way to get the thing up and running because it's already a VMDK, right? Why build a new thing when you can just put it onto hardware with a virtualization layer in the middle? So the thing I find funny is that as far as I know, EC2 is based on KVM or Zen. I think it used to be Zen. Now it's KVM. But all the appliances they ship are VMware and Hyper-V. So what the hell? You're going to base your own enterprise level cloud on a decent, in my opinion, decent virtualization layer, which is KVM. But then the thing you give to customer is the crap that, I guess it's the industry crap is really what it comes down to. VMware is kind of the industry leader when it comes to virtualization, as much as I hate to admit it. But anyway, I digress. The next thing I saw was securely delivered desktop applications with Amazon AppStream. And I mainly saw this because we have a desire to virtualize applications, even though it's not in my wheelhouse at work. So I basically watched this so I could report back to the folks who are looking at it. And it was pretty cool. Amazon AppStream will basically let you configure your own application in the cloud. It runs it on an EC2 instance, but you don't have to worry about that because it's done for you. And it presents it to your end user in an HTML5 interface. It doesn't like translate the application to an HTML5 interface. It gives them a console that is an HTML5 console. So basically, you log into a web portal, which actually uses your Google credentials, or I guess there's lots of other ways to authenticate to it, but the one they showed in the demonstration was Google, which is cool because if you're like a Google Apps place or G Suite place, you could simply log in with your existing Google credentials and then add this thing to the app menu. No, anyway, you get there and you click on the application you want, and I think they used a 3D rendering app, if I remember correctly, as their example. You click on it, and it basically opens a new window, fires up the app. Sorry, folks, it's getting late. Fires up the app, and it gives you a window that seems very much like a VM console window into just the application. It even integrates with your Google Drive, or if you're using, I forget what Amazon calls it. They have a file storage solution, or it'll write to an S3 bucket, which is pretty cool. I think that's kind of a neat application or a neat service. And the last talk that I saw was high performance computing on AWS driving innovation without infrastructure constraints. I have kind of an interest in HPC for my own reasons. Part of them are professional and part of them are just curiosity. This talk was basically a medical research firm talking about running HPC or bursting HPC into AWS because and how it affected workflows, how it sped up a certain chain of research. You'll just have to watch the talk to really understand it. They went into a lot of sort of medical stuff that I don't really understand, but I got the general gist of it, which means they had a pretty well written talk if a general IT person could at least get the flow of what they were talking about. But basically, it turned into like they got data that was publicly released to the world, and then they took that data and they did their own analysis on it, and they were able to do that quickly by using the HPC on AWS, because their own HPC cluster, which they do have because they're a research firm, was already taken up doing other jobs, and they couldn't just take those jobs away to crunch this new job. So anyway, it was kind of a neat talk, and it was a pretty cool use for cloud services, I think. Basically filling a need just in time, right? So that was pretty cool. All right, and the last thing to talk about was the party at the end of reInvent, which was actually kind of fun. They call it Replay. It's got sort of a rich history of DJs coming to see. It's basically like a big EDM party. They had 3 DJs playing. The first DJ, I want to apologize. I wanted to look up her name before I started the show, and with all the confusion leading up to tonight's show, I didn't get a chance to, and I'm just realizing now that I didn't. I believe her name was Jenna. I don't remember her last name. And no, I don't mean the porn star from the 90s. I mean a DJ named Jenna, and she had a lot of energy. It was a really fun show, and I want to look up this DJ again because I want to see if I can find some of her music or find some of her live performances, because it was a lot of fun. She did a lot of mixing of well-known songs, and she did it well. I'd love to hear her music again. It was really good. The next artist was, it's spelled Mija. I believe it's pronounced Mija, or you could call it Misha, but I think it's Mija. I think I heard it pronounced somewhere as Mija. I believe that's how it was pronounced. Anyway, she was also very good. She played like an hour and a half set, and I stood in a crowded room for the entire set because it was worth it. It was a really good set. I liked. She had good music, good rhythm, good beat. In case you can't tell, EDM is one of the genres of music that I really enjoy, and so I was really looking forward to this party. And then the main act was Skrillex, who has played, he's played reInvent before. They brought him back because they thought his show was so good last time. I'm going to go into a little bit of detail on how this show was organized, and then I'll tell you why I didn't see much of Skrillex. So basically, Replay has a bunch of activities for people to just basically have fun, right? And then they have this separate section that is the venue for the actual EDM concert. You can hear the music just about anywhere because it's loud. And in the section where the games are, you can also hear it because I think they actually pipe it through speakers, so you can hear it over there. They had things like archery tag. They had like one of these contests where they have the big padded spiked ball on this big platform, and you're supposed to knock your opponent off. They had office chair races. They had this thing they call broom ball, which is kind of like hockey with brooms. I don't know. It's apparently an AWS thing. They had dodgeball. They had free beer, which was good. And they had long lines, which is what I was getting to. So I wanted to play archery tag because I've heard of archery tag, and it sounds like a hell of a lot of fun. So I went and got a beer, and I sat down to go watch archery tag, and I watched how it was played, and I'm like, all right, cool. I'm going to play this. First, I'm going to get rid of this beer. So I drank it quick. I'm going to hit the bathroom because I don't want to play archery tag with a full bladder. Too much information, sure. And then I'm going to come back and play archery tag. So I did those two things. I came back to play archery tag, and the line was so freaking long, I was unwilling to wait to play. So I'm like, all right, I'm going to go get another beer, and I'm going to go watch the EDM show because that seems like a good thing to do. So I go get another beer. There's surprisingly not long lines for the beers. I guess they just served fast enough. And after I got the beer, I started watching the music, and I decided I'm probably going to want to go back to the bathroom again. Back to the bathroom, and there is a line a mile long for the men's room. Welcome to IT conference. The line went fast enough, but I was really not interested in waiting in line all night. So I decided this was the last drink I was having, and I'm just going to go back and watch the watch the concert. So I did. I went back, and I mean, you can imagine any concert if you've never been to a concert. Maybe you can't imagine, but basically, you walk in and you're going to find the whole crowd as close to the stage as possible, and then as it moves away from the stage, it sort of sparsifies, right? So I got about as close as I could without stepping on people's feet, and I'm enjoying the music. And I'm standing there having fun, enjoying the music, tapping my feet, bobbing my head, usual stuff. And before I know it, the second act is over and Skrillex is about to come on. I'm like, all right, cool. So we're between sets at this point. Skrillex isn't playing yet. I start looking around. I am in a sardine can packed room of people. There's like probably 40 or 50 rows of people that have filed in behind me, just as packed as the people that are close to the stage. And at this point, I'm like, I don't like this. Like I said, I'm not a big fan of cities. I'm also not a huge fan of crowds. It was crowded enough when I got there, but I was okay because there was space. But once it got packed like this, I'm not going to say that I panicked, but I was definitely not comfortable. I'm like, all right, I'm going to move back. So I started moving back, and I mean, this was so crowded. I don't want to say pushing people out of my way, but that's essentially what it came down to. I'm glad I didn't have a bag or something because it would have been impossible to move around. But basically, I'm not a huge guy. I'm short. I'm not exactly overweight, but I'm thin-ish, right? So I feel like I can move around in a crowd pretty well. It was tight for me. It was really tight. I got back as far as like this barricade that's around the sounds the sound mixer folks that are usually toward the back that are like adjusting and tweaking to make sure everything sounds perfect. And there's sort of a gap around the barricade. So I'm standing at the barricade for a while just so I can breathe for a bit and enjoy Skrillex. Skrillex comes on. He gets through like his first two sets. And I'm like, I've had enough. But there's so many people in here that I still can't get out of the dang room. So I basically just waited around until basically lines of people. I think how this would work is one guy would think, I need to move, and he'd start moving. And then other people would take advantage of the gap that he made and follow him. So as I'm standing there at this barricade, every now and then I'd see this train of people go through the crowd. And I'm like, that's what I'm going to do. Is so the next train comes through, I'm going to follow it out. So I did. The next train comes through, I follow it. They're going over toward the game section, but the game section wasn't as crowded anymore because the everyone was watching Skrillex. I did that. I got out of the room, and I felt much better about just everything. And at that point, I'm like, I've had enough. I'm going back to the hotel. It's like 10:30 at night. The show went till midnight, I think. So I missed about an hour and a half of Skrillex. Whatever. Skrillex isn't exactly my favorite artist in the world. If it was like Deadmau5 or something, I'd have been hanging out. But yeah, it was fun, but that many people, they basically held it at a fairgrounds, which in Vegas is basically a paved lot with fake grass on top of it. Really not what I was expecting, but whatever. At least my shoes didn't get muddy. It was fun. I don't know that if I go to reInvent again, unless it's an artist I really, really want to see, I may not go back to replay because it was just too crowded. If they found a bigger venue to put it in, maybe. But yeah, it was. I like the music. I'd have been happier if I could have played archery tag. It just wasn't. I don't know. It's not my thing. It is my thing, but it's not. I don't know. It's hard to explain. It was just too damn crowded. If it wasn't so crowded, I would have been very happy. It would have been a very fun event. So anyway, that's AWS reInvent as I saw it. I will say that now that I'm home, looking back at my experience at reInvent, I felt very out of place. And the reason for that is kind of what I went into before. I don't feel like AWS is for me. And I don't mean because of some opinion that I hold where the cloud is evil or something, even though maybe I do hold that opinion. I mean, I don't think it's designed for ops people. It is very much designed to cut ops people out of the mix. And that bothers me a little bit, being an ops person. It probably just means I need to adapt and move on to something that is still relevant. But it feels very developer focused. And I think that's exactly the point, right? It's supposed to enable developers to get their stuff done without having to wait for a server guy to build them in some more RHEL infrastructure or a database guy to give them a grant or a network guy to open up the firewall. It's meant to enable all of that. It's meant to put all of that in the hands of the person that needs the work done, um, which is good and bad. Good in that you can get things done faster. Bad in that you're handing a lot of responsibility off to someone who didn't have to worry about it before. And if that person is well trained, that's great. If they're not, that could be a problem. So that's my closing thoughts, I think, on Amazon AWS reInvent and AWS in general. But yeah, I'm not going to say it was a bad time. I'm not going to say it was um, the best conference I've ever been to either. There were a couple gaps, I thought. But again, huge amount of people, huge amount of work had to go into running that place or running that conference. So I cut them a little bit of slack. I do feel like Red Hat treated me better at Summit, though. Summit was very, I don't know, maybe it's because it was ops focused. Red Hat's very ops focused. Maybe I just felt like more of a king there. I don't know. But anyway, folks, thank you for hanging out with me tonight. Even though we had no co-hosts, I would have loved there to be a little more banter. But whatever, it is what it is. If this went well enough, maybe the next time the co-hosts can't show up, I will try to do it again. If you found this boring and horrible, please let me know. And I'll make sure we don't do it again. I wanted to get a show out because we missed last week because I was in Vegas. There was no way we were going to record while I was in Vegas. There was just the time difference was a problem. Like I said before, hang out with us next week to hopefully chat with Ed Scotus. I'm going to follow up with him this week, make sure we're still on, but I didn't hear anything from him saying we weren't, so hopefully we are. That should be a fun night chatting. I'm really looking forward to Holiday Hack. If you're not signed up for Holiday Hack, please go sign up because it is fun. Even if you're a sysadmin like me, it's fun to just sort of get out of your usual day-to-day routine and try out something new. I don't want to say I did well in Holiday Hack. 2016 was the first year I did it. I don't want to say that I did well, but I'll say that I got through like a good half or so of the challenge. And that was basically the half leading up to where you found Santa, right? So anyone who played 2016 will know what I'm talking about. But there's a lot of like terminals, like Linux terminals that you need to get into and do things in. And I got through all of those, which really surprised me. Maybe it shouldn't because I work with Linux all day long, but I surprised myself in the amount of ingenuity I was able to pull up to, get around systems and break out of shells and, do whatever I had to do. So that was fun. And I look forward to talking to Ed about it. So, all right. So I'm going to call it a show for tonight, folks. Remember, you can find us on iTunes and all the other various podcast places. Please go subscribe and give us a review if you want to give us some feedback. You can also, I think you can still email us at podcast@ironsysadmin.com. That goes to me and I think all the other co-hosts. I don't know. I'll have to check into that. It's been a long time since we've used that email address. You can also go to ironsysadmin.com and you can find our shows and comment on them there. And yeah, basically just you can reach out to me on Twitter as well. I'm at Gangriff. The show is at Iron Sysadmin. And feel free to reach out. Let us know how we're doing. Let us know what you'd like to hear. Let us know if you like the show or whatever. So yeah, I think we're going to call it a night, folks. Thank you for hanging out with me. And we'll catch you next week with Ed Scotus. All right, YouTube tells me there are 2 viewers. I know there's one been chatting with me, Mr. No Thanks. So thanks for watching. I'm going to stop the broadcast. You can catch me on the Slack channel if you want to keep chatting, though. So thanks for hanging out.